China's tariff cuts versus US barriers, Africa's opportunity. In the global fight between China and the US, Africa was not supposed to win. But their rivalry is opening unexpected doors. China is dropping tariffs on African goods while the West slaps them on. Is this Africa's moment to cash in? I'm Janani Tesfaye, and this is Analytica Today. For centuries, Africa's been a price taker. Its economies bent to Western will through unfair trade and lopsided global systems like the UN or World Bank. But the US-China trade war is shifting the board. China's pledge to drop tariffs on imports from 53 African nations is a windfall opportunity, while Western missteps like US tariffs and diplomatic blunders are pushing Africa toward Beijing. Today, we will unpack how this rivalry is giving Africa leverage, how the West is reacting, and what it means for you. Here are the facts. Africa's trade story is one of exploitation. First, colonial powers looted its wealth, and post-independence the rules were written elsewhere, in Washington, Brussels, Moscow, Paris. The US and Europe kept the upper hand. They set the terms. Africa delivered raw materials. In return, Africa received finished goods, debt, and dependency. Think Angola's oil or Congo's coltan at rock-bottom prices while settling terms through loans and trade deals. Global institutions reflect this imbalance. The World Bank prioritizes Western interests, and the UN Security Council or ICC often seem to zero in African nations. These power gaps cost Africa dearly. In 2023, its trade deficit hit $100 billion, with wealth draining out as unprocessed goods. African leaders have long demanded a fairer deal, but with the West dominating, options were scarce. Now, a US-China rivalry is changing that, and Africa's finding room to maneuver. The US-China trade war is heating up, and Africa's catching the benefits. Earlier this week, China announced it will drop tariffs on imports from 53 African countries, excluding Eswatini over its Taiwan stance. This expands a 2024 deal for 33 least developed nations, now including powerhouses like Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. China-Africa trade hit $295.6 billion in 2024, up from 4.8% from 2023, with a 14.2% annual growth rate since 2000. That's miles ahead of the America's $39.5 billion in African imports or the EU's shrinking share. From Ethiopia's sesame to South Africa's pecans, China's buying big. Compare that to what the US is doing. President Trump's administration has proposed massive tariffs on African goods, 50% on Lesotho, 30% on South Africa, 14% on Nigeria. Yes, Africa's poorest nations are getting hit the hardest. And the once praised AGOA deal, which gave African goods free entry into US markets, is on life support set to expire soon with no clear replacement. This matters because China is not just making trade fair, it's using America's mistakes to win African trust. Here's where things get interesting. For the first time in modern history, Africa has real options. Before, the world was unipolar. The West dictated the terms. But now, China, India, Russia, and others are competing for influence, and trade is their weapon of choice. Since 2000, China-Africa trade has grown over 20 times, from under $14 billion to nearly $300 billion. Meanwhile, US-Africa trade sits around $39 billion and declining. If this trend holds by 2030, China-Africa trade could double, while US-Africa trade risks becoming irrelevant. But here's the big shift. This is not just about selling minerals. African nations want value-added trade, jobs, and supply chain investments. China's new offer could be a step toward that if African leaders play their cards right. But it's not all rosy. While this moment is full of promise, it is also full of risk. The last time two global powers competed for Africa's loyalty, the continents got proxy wars, coups, and Cold War chaos. If this rivalry spirals in a similar fashion, Africa could become a battleground yet again, losing another generation. Africa must play this smart. It doesn't need to choose sides. What it needs is fair terms, multiple partners, and strong institutions to make sure deals benefit citizens, not just elites. Because leverage is only power if you know how to use it. The US-China trade wars handling Africa is a real windfall. China's zero-tariff move opens the door to a new era of trade, while the US tariffs and Western diplomatic blunders reminds us how fast things can go backwards. But the bigger story here is how a functioning multipolar world benefits Africa. For the first time in decades, Africa does not have to take what it's given. It can choose, it can bargain, it can walk away. Because in a functioning multipolar world, no single power gets to dictate Africa's future. And with 1.4 billion people and 40% of the world's critical minerals, Africa holds more than just resources. It holds leverage. The only question is, will African leaders rise to meet the moment or let it slip by? Thanks for watching Analytica Today. And if you find this video interesting, drop a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.